This Notebook LM video explores how Christianity evolved during its first 3 centuries, from a diverse movement into a unified faith. The focus is on the ante-Nicene period. The communities were far from uniform. Daily practices included rituals like the Holy Kiss, foot washing, veiling of women, and fixed prayers throughout the day.
Okay, let's dive right in. We tend to have this picture in our heads of the early church as this single, unified movement, right? Spreading out from Jerusalem. But the truth, for the first few hundred years was, well, it was a lot messier, a lot more chaotic, and way more fascinating.
So let's just start with a thought experiment. Imagine you're a believer, say in the year 150 AD. What does your faith actually look like? Do you even read the Old Testament? Is Jesus fully human, fully divine, or maybe something else entirely? The wild thing is the answer totally depends on which Christian group you happen to be a part of. There simply wasn't one Christianity yet.
In fact, historians have a great phrase for this period: violent, creative ferment. And it's perfect, because across the Roman Empire, you had all these different Christianities just bubbling up. Each one had its own scriptures, its own leaders, its own ideas about God. It was like a spiritual marketplace, with everyone claiming they had the true teachings of Jesus.
And this table really shows you just how deep the disagreements went. I mean, look at this. You have the Proto-orthodox, who are basically the ancestors of mainstream Christianity. They believed in one God, creator of everything, and Jesus as his divine son. Simple enough. But then you get the Marcionites, who thought the angry creator God of the Old Testament was a totally different, lesser God than the loving Father Jesus talked about. And the Gnostics, they taught that the physical world was a mistake made by a flawed creator and that Jesus came to give us secret knowledge, or gnosis, to escape it. We're not talking about minor details here. These are fundamentally different worldviews.
Okay, so what did all this actually look like in daily life? Because this diversity wasn't just some abstract theological debate. It shaped how people actually lived out their faith, day in and day out.
So, the daily life for an early Christian was full of rituals that might feel a little strange to us now. The Holy Kiss, for example, wasn't just a friendly greeting. It was a formal religious ritual for baptized members only, and it was done gender segregated. Foot washing was a regular part of worship, a symbol of cleansing and humility. And female head covering? It wasn't just a suggestion. Some sources are really specific, saying it had to be an opaque cloth, not just a see-through veil.
And we know about these details because church leaders like this guy, Tertullian, wrote about them all the time. Around the year 200, he was making the case for veiling, arguing that it was a direct tradition from the apostles themselves. You can see how these leaders were constantly trying to standardize these practices and give them a sacred authority for their followers.
And this really illustrates the incredible structure that faith brought to daily life. Believers were instructed to pray 7 times a day at fixed hours, from the moment they woke up until the middle of the night. And this wasn't just for monks or clergy, this was for everybody. Faith wasn't just a weekly thing, it was the entire rhythm of your day.
So, with all this wild diversity in what people believed and how they practiced, the big question is, how did one version of Christianity win? How did this collection of scattered movements ever become a single organized church?
Well, it came down to organization. One of these groups, the one we now call Proto-orthodox, started to build the structures needed to create a unified vision. And they did it by defining what was right belief, orthodoxy, and just as importantly, labeling everyone else's ideas as wrong belief or heresy.
A huge piece of this puzzle was creating a clear chain of command. You had the bishop at the top, basically the CEO for all the Christians in a city. Then you had presbyters, or elders, who assisted him and would eventually become our modern priests. And deacons handled the day-to-day work, helping the poor and sick. This structure was a game changer because it led to the idea of apostolic succession, the claim that a bishop's authority could be traced in an unbroken line all the way back to Jesus' original apostles.
But a good hierarchy isn't enough. You also need everyone to be, reading from the same playbook. And that was a huge problem. In the 2nd century, there were dozens of different gospels and letters floating around, all claiming to be the real deal. To get everyone on the same page, the Proto-orthodox leaders had to decide which books are in and which are out.
And let me tell you, this was not a quick process. As you can see here, even though most of the books were written by 120 AD, we don't see the first real attempt at a list of approved texts for another 50 years. And for more than a century after that, people were still arguing about whether to include books like Revelation or James.
It wasn't until the 4th century that the 27-book New Testament we know today was finally nailed down by the mainstream church.
So now you've got this more organized, more textually defined version of Christianity, and it was about to face its greatest test, because its disciplined structure would be crucial as it went up against the most powerful force in the ancient world, the Roman Empire. And here's the great paradox. Even though it was this weird, sometimes hated, outsider religion, Christianity was growing at an absolutely astonishing rate. One sociologist has estimated that it grew by about 40% every single decade. Think about that. This was a viral grassroots explosion.
But that unbelievable growth happened even as the Roman state tried to crush it. In 250 AD, Emperor Decius launched the first persecution across the entire empire. 50 years later, Diocletian started the Great Persecution, the worst one in history. It looked bleak, and yet, just a decade later, everything changed. By 313, with the Edict of Milan, Emperor Constantine made Christianity legal. The turnaround was just breathtaking.
And would you just look at the result? Once it was legal, the growth went into overdrive. In just a few decades after the persecutions finally ended, Christians went from being a harassed minority to making up an estimated 56.5% of the entire Roman population. It is one of the most incredible religious shifts in all of human history.
All right, let's wrap this all up. Let's look at how this scattered collection of competing spiritualities managed to transform in just 300 years into the official religion of the Western world.
So, the most important thing to take away from all this is that the unified Christianity we know today didn't just pop into existence. It was forged. It was hammered into shape over centuries of fierce debate, conflict, and careful organization. And this whole process really came to a head at events like the First Council of Nicaea in 325, where bishops from all over the empire met with the emperor himself watching to create a single, unified creed.
And that whole journey, from all those different faiths down to just one, it leaves us with a really powerful, lingering question. This process of creating an orthodoxy gave the religion a unity and a structure that allowed it to survive and thrive. But as one version was lifted up, others, like the Gnostics, the Marcionites, were pushed down and eventually forgotten. So as this one faith was being forged, we have to ask, what was gained and what was lost?